What if I told you that the way we're taught to be polite, to argue logically, and even to apologize is actually a form of low-grade constant violence? Sounds crazy, right? We're all just trying to get along, at work, at home. But somehow, we still end up feeling misunderstood, disconnected, and just plain exhausted by it all. The answer lies inside nonviolent communication, and we're about to shortcut right to it. What if I told you that the way we're taught to be polite, to argue logically, and even to apologize is actually a form of low-grade constant violence? Sounds crazy, right? We're all just trying to get along, at work, at home. But somehow, we still end up feeling misunderstood, disconnected, and just plain exhausted by it all. Today, we're talking to the book that claims to have the answer, Nonviolent Communication. Book, welcome. Your central premise is provocative, to say the least.
Thank you for having me. And you're right to be skeptical. The violence I speak of isn't physical. It's the language of judgment, blame, and demands that we use every day. Language that disconnects us from our own humanity and the humanity of others.
Okay, let's ground this in reality. My audience isn't dealing with philosophical concepts, they're dealing with horrible bosses, endless meetings, and the constant stress of just trying to get through the week. How does nonviolent language help someone whose job is driving them into the ground?
It helps by addressing the single most expensive and draining activity in the American workplace: conflict. The core idea of nonviolent communication, or NVC, is that conflict doesn't arise because people are inherently bad. It arises when our strategies for meeting our needs clash. Instead of judging the other person, my boss is a micromanager, my colleague is lazy, we learn to identify the universal human needs underneath the conflict, both for ourselves and for them.
That sounds idealistic. Let's talk numbers. A 2024 report says American employees waste, on average, 2.8 hours per week dealing with conflict. That's costing companies an estimated $359 billion a year in lost productivity. And that same data shows that nearly half of all managers admit they're not even equipped to handle these conflicts. So while your idea of universal human needs is nice, how does it stop the bleeding? How does it give that unprepared manager a real tool to use on a Tuesday morning when two team members are at each other's throats?
That's the perfect question because NVC is anything but idealistic. It's intensely practical. The tool for that Tuesday morning is the OFNR Framework. It's 4 steps: observation, feeling, need, and request. Instead of saying, "You two are always undermining each other, and it's unprofessional," which is a judgment that invites defensiveness, the manager can say, "Oh, when I see emails between you with CCs to my boss, I feel worried and frustrated, and because I have a deep need for our team to be collaborative and trusted. Would you be willing to talk with me for 15 minutes about how we can find a better way to resolve disagreements?" This isn't soft. It's clear, it's honest, and it shifts the focus from blame to a shared problem we can solve together.
All right, but that entire scenario assumes a level playing field. What happens when there's a serious power imbalance? I'm not talking about two colleagues. I'm talking about an employee trying to talk to a CEO, a tenant talking to a corporate landlord, or any situation where one person can just say no and ruin your life. Isn't this nonviolent language just a way for the powerless to ask nicely to be exploited?
This is a critical point. NVC's purpose in a power imbalance isn't necessarily to change the more powerful person, but to empower you to communicate with clarity, integrity, and self-respect, regardless of the outcome. The focus shifts from persuasion to honest expression. You express your observation, feeling, and need not because it will guarantee a yes, but because it's true for you. This prevents you from falling into the traps of submission or aggressive rebellion, both of which are self-destructive.
I'm still not convinced. Critics have a term for this: empathy washing. A powerful boss can listen to your beautifully articulated needs and say, "I hear you're feeling undervalued because you have a need for recognition," and then do absolutely nothing. They use your language to placate you, to make you feel heard, while changing zero of the underlying conditions. They use NVC as a manipulation tactic. How do you defend against that?
You defend against it by mastering the 4th step, the request. And more importantly, by understanding the difference between a true request and a hidden demand. A request is an invitation, where no is an acceptable answer. A demand is a threat, where no will be met with punishment or guilt. If a boss empathy washes you, you can see their no not as a personal rejection, but as information. Their refusal to meet your request reveals that their strategy and your needs are in conflict. Your tool here is clarity. You can then say, "Thank you for hearing me. Since it seems we can't meet my need for growth in this role, I need to consider other options." The power of NVC here isn't in forcing their hand. It's in giving you the clarity to make your own choices based on your own, now clearly understood needs.
Let's move from the boardroom to the browser. We live in an America that is incredibly polarized. A 2024 report found that 55% of internet users have been targets of online hate. Political views are now the #1 reason people are harassed online. How can a system based on finding shared humanity possibly work against an anonymous Twitter troll whose only goal is to cause pain?
It's vital to be clear here. NVC is not a magic wand to stop malicious actors. Its primary application in the face of anonymous hate is not directed outward, but inward. When you are attacked online, the most profound violence often happens inside your own mind. The self-doubt, the rage, the replaying of the insult. The goal is not to empathize with the troll. That's often impossible and fruitless. The goal is to offer empathy to yourself.
Self-empathy? That sounds like letting them win. It sounds passive. Someone calls you an idiot, launches a hateful tirade, and your response is to, what? Give yourself a hug. People want justice, they want to fight back, they want the abuse to stop. How does self-empathy accomplish any of that in the real world?
It's the furthest thing from passive. It's the step you take before effective action. The tool here is using OFNR on yourself. When you read that hateful comment, you pause. Observation. I am reading words on a screen calling me an idiot. Feeling. I feel a surge of anger, hurt, and maybe fear. Need. This is because my need for respect, safety, and belonging is being violated. Request to yourself. Can I take 3 deep breaths and give myself a moment of compassion before I decide how to respond? This process short-circuits the reactive part of your brain. It doesn't mean you don't block the user, report the comment, or advocate for better online policies. But you do it from a place of centered strength, not from a place of raw, hijacked pain. You are no longer a puppet to their provocation.
This focus on the individual brings up a huge criticism. You're talking about individual word choices, but what about systemic problems? Racism, sexism, inequality. Critics argue that NVC dangerously reduces these massive structural issues to simple communication problems. It puts the onus on the person being oppressed to empathize with their oppressor's unmet needs. Isn't that a profound, almost obscene form of victim blaming?
That critique is one I take very seriously. If NVC is used to deny or obscure systemic oppression, it is being misused. Let me be unequivocal. NVC is not about tolerating injustice. It's about transforming the energy of anger, which is the natural response to injustice, into life-serving action. Anger is a beautiful, vital signal that a core need for justice, equality, dignity, respect is not being met. The jackal way of expressing anger is through blame and punishment, which often escalates conflict and rarely leads to the change we want. The giraffe way, my way, is to connect that anger to the beautiful need it's defending.
Okay, but connecting to the beautiful need can sound awfully gentle in the face of real harm. The FBI reported that hate crimes hit a record high in 2022. Some feminist critics argue NVC disproportionately burdens women and marginalized groups with emotional labor, forcing them to be the nice ones, to manage the aggressor's feelings, instead of just screaming this is wrong and it needs to stop. How is NVC not just a more elaborate way of tone policing the victims?
Because screaming this is wrong and it needs to stop is a valid NVC expression. It's a raw expression of a need for safety and justice. The NVC framework doesn't police that. It helps you clarify what comes next. The tool here is understanding the vital difference between the protective use of force and the punitive use of force. Punitive force aims to make someone suffer. Protective force aims only to prevent injury or injustice. You can use NVC to say, I am unwilling for this behavior to continue. My need for physical and emotional safety is paramount. I am now removing myself from this situation, calling for help, taking this specific action to protect myself. This is not about being nice. It's about being clear, grounded, and focused on protecting your needs, which is the most powerful stance you can take against injustice.
Let's bring this home. Literally, For the millions of Americans stuck in a loop with their partner or kids, the same arguments, the same frustrations. They try to be calm, they try to explain, but it goes nowhere. Honestly, applying a rigid formula to your spouse sounds, well, ridiculous and a little insulting. Who actually talks like that?
Nobody. And nobody should. If you are speaking like a robot, you have missed the entire point. The point is not to memorize a script. The point is to cultivate a different kind of consciousness, one aimed at connection rather than being right. The language is just a pathway to get there. The goal is to translate your judgments. My partner is so messy into your own vulnerable truth. I feel overwhelmed because I have a need for order and peace in our shared space. The words themselves can and should sound like you.
But people have tried, and they report that it feels mechanical and inauthentic. It creates more distance. Imagine saying to your teenager, "When I observe your clothes on the floor, I feel frustrated because my need for order isn't met." Would you be willing to put them in the hamper? You'd get an eye roll so hard it would cause an earthquake. It feels like you're a therapist, not their parent. How do you get past that cringeworthy, unnatural phase?
You get past it by focusing on the metaphor I provide, the giraffe and the jackal. The giraffe has the largest heart of any land animal and a long neck to see from a wider perspective. Giraffe language is the language of connection. The jackal lives close to the ground, sees things as right or wrong, and communicates with bites and snarls. The OFNR formula is just a giraffe phrasebook. It's awkward at first, like learning any new language. The tool is to practice with the intention, not the words. Maybe it sounds more like, "Hey, when I see the coats on the floor, I get this tight feeling in my chest. It's just really important for me to feel like we have a calm space to come home to. Can we figure out a better system?" You're still hitting the same notes: observation, feeling, need, request, but you're playing your own music. The eye roll often comes when the other person senses a demand hidden in a nice request. The key is your genuine willingness to hear no and work with them from there.
Okay, last area, and it's a big one. High-stakes situations. A salary negotiation, a legal battle, a major business deal. Your entire philosophy is built on empathy, connection, and vulnerability. In a zero-sum, high-stakes negotiation, isn't that just a recipe for getting steamrolled? Isn't it just weak?
It's a common misconception that vulnerability is weakness. In this context, the vulnerability of NVC is actually a strategic strength. Most negotiations get stuck on positions. I want a $10,000 raise. We can only offer $3,000. People dig in. NVC shifts the conversation to the underlying needs. Why do you need the $10,000? Is it for a need for recognition? For security? To support your family? Why can they only offer $3,000? Is there need for budget predictability? For fairness across the team? When you get to the level of needs, you open up a world of strategies you hadn't considered.
That's a nice theory, but in the real world, as your own critics point out, a negotiator might see your open, needs-based approach as naive and exploited. If you say, "I need to feel valued," they might just offer you a new title with no extra pay. You're showing them your weak spots. How is it not a better strategy to keep your cards close to your chest, be aggressive, and fight for every dollar?
Because fighting for every dollar often leaves both parties feeling resentful, creating a toxic long-term relationship. The NVC approach isn't about revealing weakness. It's about expanding the pie before you divide it. And a key tool here is the ability to empathically say no. Let's take your example. They offer a title instead of money. A jackal response might be, "That's insulting." An NVC response would be, "I appreciate the offer of a new title, and I hear that you are trying to meet my need for recognition. Thank you for that. And it doesn't meet my need for financial security to cover my rising family costs. So, while I cannot accept that offer, would you be willing to explore other options with me that could meet both the company's budget needs and my family's security needs?" You are not weak. You are clear. You are respectful. And you are powerfully holding your ground, not on a position "I need $10,000, but on a non-negotiable human need. That is the ultimate source of strength in any room.
So, whether at work, online, or at home, you're arguing that the goal isn't to win the argument, but to re-establish a connection from which real solutions can grow. It's a fundamental shift in the purpose of conversation.
Precisely. To connect before you correct. To seek understanding before you seek agreement. It's not about being nice or passive. It's about being effective by being human.